The HIF is a proposal of an organization called Incentives for Global Health, and it's basically, like the past presentation, a new way of thinking about an old idea. So instead of focusing on patents and focusing on what the market will bear in sort of rich countries for drugs, we're proposing an alternative system. And the system relies upon how much health impact a given drug has. So the idea is, if your drug does a lot of good for a lot of people, then we'll pay you for it. And if it doesn't, then we won't pay you as much. And governments, in essence, have to realign the way that they're paying for healthcare. This is true of medical devices. This is true of everything from sort of Viagra to heart medicine, and from polio vaccines to malaria vaccines. So the idea is, and don't worry about all of the ton of content that's on these slides. There's going to be much more writing up there than you could possibly get through in 6 minutes and 40 seconds. But the idea is, come up with a system wherein governments pay for performance and pharmaceutical companies are incentivized to produce drugs for the diseases that impact the most people in the largest way. So the problem right now is that prices are inflated, they're out of reach for the poor, and in large part they're motivated by a very, very small percentage of the population of the world. And as a result, there's far too little access to medicines. I mean, I think that's a pretty well-known idea right now. Pharmaceutical manufacturers have to focus on evergreening, they have to focus on marketing, they have to patent their drugs in every country across the entire world in order to make a profit, they claim. And in many cases, they're absolutely right. The system is engineered in a way that motivates them to try to make a profit as a result of their patent monopolies. We're proposing that we change the system. Instead of having 90% of the world have access to 10% of the medicines and vice versa, the exact same way that our financial system operates, and this is actually a slide based on the financial system, but the numbers are almost identical in terms of access to medicines, we want to flip it on its head and have access to medicines determined by need and payment for medicines determined by performance. So right now, this fundamental problem is that access is undermined even though in rich countries we actually have enough not only to pay for ourselves, but to pay for access worldwide and more. And if we get the incentives right, pharmaceutical companies will also benefit. So the idea is fix a system where there's this massive 1090 gap, fix problems with sort of overall efficiency being diminished by lobbying. My last job, actually, or a couple jobs ago, I was a lobbyist for generics, and ironically, even Canadian generics, some of the largest generics in the world, do a lot of lobbying in ways that undermine access to medicines. And so the question is, how do we reorganize the industry? The ideal system, as I said, focuses on patients and their needs. It focuses on R&D investment in the areas that will benefit the most people, and it focuses on cost effectiveness. But the fundamental need is to focus on a way to make our money go a lot further for a lot more people. So the way the HIF works is you create a big fund, and you get companies to register their drugs, and these are the drugs that they're not already making a lot of money on. These are the drugs that will have a huge impact, but for whatever reason the market isn't supporting. And we pay them over 10 years in proportion to the effect that their drug has on a given population. If you have a big population on a lot of people, we'll pay you a lot. You have a smaller effect, we pay you less. And so the idea right now is $6 billion fund, 20 years from now, something looking sort of like the global fund, and everybody registers with it, with those drugs that sort of need additional support outside of the existing system. This slide is key because it shows that pharmaceutical innovators have both options. We're not proposing you scrap the patent system. We're not proposing that you scrap the existing system of payment in sort of first world countries or the West, quote unquote. Instead, you focus on those drugs that operate outside of the system, that aren't being supported by it. You focus on the R&D that isn't being incentivized, and you incentivize it by running a parallel system where, again, payment is based on performance. And so with those sort of key fundamental ideas behind it, we've created this proposed fund, and right now we really need to pilot it. So we've got to find all of the various components that have to come together in order to demonstrate that this is possible, that these principles are true in reality. The gains, as this slide demonstrates, are huge. There's 50,000 people who die every day as a result of diseases that could easily be prevented using widely available medicines in the West. And even in rich countries, there's a lot of problems that could easily be solved if the incentives were aligned differently. Diabetes, a huge problem in obviously North America, could be dealt with much better through medical devices, for instance, that aren't supported by the current market system. They're too expensive to produce for the way that we reward companies. And so the great thing about the HIF is it basically benefits everybody. It benefits the innovators, the pharmaceutical companies, because they're able to profit off of all of those drugs that wouldn't be profitable otherwise. We'll pay them for the drugs that have a health impact. It obviously benefits the patients, because most fundamentally, it's ensuring access much more equitably for all those patients that don't already have it. And it actually benefits governments too. And this is one of the harder arguments that we have to make. But governments in the West, and obviously governments in developing countries, benefit because this makes the system for delivering healthcare way more efficient and equitable. Instead of focusing massive amounts of money on a small percentage of the population, you're spreading it across the entire population. So what we've already got down is the support in academia. Our advisory board includes 4 Nobel laureates. We've got sort of former president of the current president of the World Bank, Paul Martin, you name it. Lots of support in terms of academia and sort of some luminaries. What we don't yet have is the widespread public support. And that's really important because the money in some ways is dependent on it. The support from pharmaceutical innovators is dependent on it. And the ability to test a lot of the ideas behind our system are dependent on all of you at some point learning about it and supporting this alternative to the future sort of patent systems and pharmaceutical and healthcare systems of the world. So I guess our plea is check out healthimpactfund.org. On Twitter, it's @healthimpact, although that's just getting started. And let's change the way that sort of healthcare works.